Welcome everyone to this webinar on cross-cultural collaboration and communication. I am Colia Braun-Greiner, and I'm a program coordinator with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And this webinar is part of a series of webinars that are considered continuing education for faithful green leaders who have taken our training. And if you have not taken that training, please look at our website under programs and look for the upcoming training that you could register for. We also encourage you to look for other webinars on the Learning Lab webpage under the programs. So we have an exciting lineup of speakers to raise awareness about how to engage diverse communities in creation care, collaboration, and we're going to begin, as we always do, with an opening reflection, and this one is going to be a land acknowledgement from Ruth Ann Purchase. I'm delighted to introduce Ruth Ann. She represents Friends of the Lenape everywhere. And learning to honor her mother's people, Ruth Ann is a water protector, and she also has immersed herself in the Unami dialect of the Lenape language, and she supports cultural restoration and sustainable development through the arts with honor for Lenape everywhere. Thank you, Ruth Ann, for your presence here.
Wanishi. Nulam hitawananak okwelen kunduwakan. I'm grateful to be here and hope we learn to live in peace and friendship. That was in the Unami language. But tonight I'm going to read a little different land acknowledgement that was prepared specifically for the Chesapeake Bay. So those of you who aren't familiar, this has lots, it's packed with information, and yet it's very poetic and gives us a spiritual basis for our desire to honor. This was written just this past November by Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake team, with Taylor and Matt Himes very much involved. Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake recognizes that we stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us. We recognize that the American story does not begin with the colonial era, but rather with the arrival of the first people thousands of years before. Their stories help define who we are and what our nation will become. Today and all days, we honor our country's future by recognizing our shared past. There is no part of our culture that has not been positively influenced by our indigenous communities. It is time to dismantle the barriers that separate our communities, a goal not only achieved through recognition and acknowledgement of our past, but with help, Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake has prepared a statement honoring our commitment to indigenous communities of the Chesapeake region, recognizing the land and waters where these communities once flourished. We hope you will join us and share this reflection. Today, we wish to hold space for silent reflection and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were stewarded by many who came before us. For tens of thousands of years, Algonquin-speaking cousins called the shores of the Chesapeake home. Although we have lost many names, we ask you to say their names aloud as we learn to restore honor for their stewardship of these ancient lands and waterways. Lenape, Nanticoke, Cuscawaroc, Piscataway, Choptank, Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Pamunkey, Rappahannock, Cherahaka, Nottoway, Patawomek, Anahannock, Akahannock, Naus Waishwai, Asateague, Pocomoke, Wikomis. The original people believed they belonged to these lands and waters, not the other way around. Their spirituality and identity were place-based. The stories these indigenous people, plants, animals, lands, and rivers witnessed are filled with environmental, social, and climate changes interwoven with all stories of many struggles, injustices, and resilience. Many of these indigenous people were displaced by European settlers who scarred this land with brutal institutions of forced slavery and extermination, the legacy of which we all are still working to overcome. For more than 400 years, the lands and waters of the Chesapeake have watched and borne ill treatment. As forests are removed, lands are poisoned and paved, while populations of other species are decimated by loss of habitat and overconsumption. We reflect together as people of faith in response to the calling of our hearts to come alongside the original stewards of this land and these waters that sustain us all. We seek to change the narrative of this story, our story, towards one of harmony with the gifts of all creation and all living beings. May we act upon this calling in a way that helps us not only to heal the wounds of nature, but the wounds of our common story and our living communities as well. Our hearts are full of hope as we come together with honor for all life. Wanishi, aho.
Thank you so much, Ruth Ann. Amen, and so be it. It's now my pleasure to introduce our main speaker for this webinar, Mariah Davis. And Mariah Davis is the Senior Policy and Campaigns Manager at Choose Clean Water Coalition, of which IPC is a member. Mariah manages outreach, grassroots advocacy, and civic engagement efforts to support the coalition's policy priorities. Mariah coordinates conservation organizations' efforts in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. Thank you so much, Mariah, for joining us and offering your words tonight.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much, Koila, Jody, and Anna, and everybody from Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake for having me here for this presentation. I wish I could be in person with you all, but happy to be here virtually as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ways to engage all types of communities, more so, new communities that y'all are wanting to work with, or different churches that you want to do outreach to that you haven't traditionally done before, and really just talk about some principles and tactics and good strategies to reach and to do those goals. But I've got an agenda here in which I'll plan to talk with you about today. And I know I have about 25 minutes, and I'm hoping we can save questions until the end. So I apologize if I rush through these, but I hope you can save your questions at the end so we can get through everything. But I'm going to first just start a little bit talking about the coalition and the work that we do. I'll get into some terminology and terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation. And I'll also be talking about defining your why, what that is, why it's important that you do that before you begin this work, and then some best practices for authentic engagement. You can go to the next slide. All right. So this is a map on your right. These are all the groups that we work with that are throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. They're different sizes and different colors, which means some are super small, they're local based. They might just be made up of volunteers. Some are state based, some are regional based, some are nationwide, and some are regional based. But we work with over 260 environmental organizations throughout the Bay watershed, which is pretty big geographically. And Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake is one of our closest and partners, and we're really proud to have them. But we mainly focus on doing advocacy and policy support for policies that are going to support the Chesapeake Bay restoration effort. We host a couple meetings each year. We'll do a lobby day, take people down to Capitol Hill to go lobby and talk to their legislators to talk about the importance of Bay restoration. And then we also do an in-person conference, but that's mainly what we focus on. And we have several policy priority areas. If anybody on this call is interested in joining the coalition, it's free. And I welcome any of you to join if you're interested in doing more environmental work. But we have a big focus around federal affairs, what's going on in DC, and getting that information down to our members who are working on the ground and putting projects in the ground. We have a big focus on the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load. I lead all of our energy and our equity efforts. And then we also focus on agriculture, reducing stormwater pollution, and we also have a communications focus. So that's a little bit about us, and I can share our website too after this if that's helpful. Okay, so we'll get into some terminology. I don't like to make assumptions in these presentations. I think it's just really important to define these terms and get you thinking about this as we start to think about authentic engagement. But I thought that this photo, I'm a very visual person. I thought this photo was a really great representation of both diversity and inclusion. Most of the time when we think about diversity, we think about racially, what do people look like, our various skin tones, but diversity means a lot more than that. Diversity means what religious background do you come from? What are your skill sets? What are the perspectives and the values that you bring? What's your sexual orientation? What's your gender? All of those things make up diversity, which is incredibly important to have in a workplace, but also when you're doing all types of advocacy efforts. And then inclusion. When I think about inclusion, I think of a welcoming space. Even just being a part of this presentation, it already feels very welcoming. I feel very included and welcome. I feel like people in this photo are engaging with each other, they're talking with each other. But yeah, really inclusion is, how are you being included into the conversation? How are you being included into discussion? How are you bringing yourself, and how are you representing yourself at the table? So that's diversity and inclusion, and we can go to the next slide. This is a really great image. I love this image because it gives a really great depiction of what equality, equity, and justice mean and how they're all very different. So in the first photo, you can see that there's some boxes on the ground. They're all at equal heights, but the people in the photo, they're not at equal heights, right? So starting from the left, you have the tallest person, you have the second tallest person, and then you have the shortest person on the right side. So equality is the assumption that everybody benefits from the same types of support. So what this picture is showing you is that if you give somebody the same type of support, which people are trying to see the soccer game and there's a fence in the way, if you give them a box of equal sizes, then the assumption is that everybody's going to have the same benefits. But you can see that that's not the case. The person who's the tallest has the best view, and the person who's the shortest can't even see over the box. So that's a really great depiction of equality. And then you have equity on the right side, which means you're giving everybody the support that they need. So you can see the far right person, the shortest person, is now given a box that's a lot bigger than the box that they had before. And even the person in the middle and the person on the end, now they're kind of all at equal heights, right? Because now, they've been given equity, they've been given the support that they needed to be able to see over the fence and to see the game. And then I love the last slide. So justice, this is always the outcome that we want to see. And this is really about removing the barriers and the systems of inequity that exist, which was the fence. So if we took the fence away, which was the barrier, or we made it into a fence that you could see through, we're removing and addressing the inequity that was there. So I'll continue to, throughout this presentation, use the terms diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. I usually refer to them as DEIJ, but I want you to know that they all mean different, very different things. To the next slide. Okay, so defining your why. I think it's really important anytime you're doing engagement work around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, that it's really important that you define your why. And your why at your organization can mean something very different from my why or anybody else's why. But this is at the Choose Clean Water Coalition. These are just some facts and statistics that talk about our why and how we address this internally. And I'll talk about an external why that we have as well. But if you're not familiar with Green 2.0, I highly encourage you to write that down, Green 2.0. They did a big study with the top environmental organizations that are mostly, predominantly white. They even assessed the organization that I looked for, but they found that across these top environmental organizations, people of color, they were not in leadership positions. When you think about the people who were in leadership positions, they were all white men. And so that's a huge problem for a number of reasons. There's at the top, Green 2.0, they talk about what's called a green ceiling. So I think we're all familiar with the glass ceiling, in that, women struggle to get into equal, leadership positions and things like that. But when it comes to environmental organizations, they're doing really poorly when it comes to promoting and having people of color in leadership positions. So racial composition is really off. And there's several reasons for that, which I'll talk about, but that's one of our whys. And that's something that we really care about when it comes to the Choose Clean Water Coalition and the groups that we work with, but making sure that organizations have the tools and the resources to be more inclusive and to be more welcoming of people who look like me, that can also then rise into leadership positions. We also know that, people of color make up 36% of the US population. I wish I could tell you what year this statistic is from, because I know it's increasing. I know that there is a statistic out there that says globally, people of color are going to make up the majority of the population. So it would be inappropriate to continue to consider BIPOC people as the minority, because those demographics are changing. And then the last statistic is that, I feel like oftentimes it's a misconception that people of color don't care about the environment, but we know that that's definitely not true. So these are just some internal whys that we've defined and that we continue to circle back on. You can go to the next slide. And then externally, why this work is important. Normally, if we had more time in this presentation, I'd have you all come off mute and talk to me a little bit about why each of these pictures represents environmental justice, but this is certainly work that we care about a lot. I don't consider myself to be somebody who's working on the ground going into environmental justice communities. But we are an organization that does support environmental justice legislation, because we also know that people of color and low income people are facing the brunt of environmental injustices, which means they're breathing the highest sources of pollution and emissions coming from polluting sources. And they're often at the front lines of climate change and flooding issues, and have been intrinsically and systematically impacted by redlining and all kinds of stuff. I don't think I have to go into super detail about that, but externally, this is our why. This is work that we try to support and try to combat environmental justices every day in our work. And go to the next slide. Thank you. So one of the things I want to talk about, I think this is a really great concept, but when you're trying to make changes at your organization and advocating for why this work is important, it's important that you think about all of these three things when it comes to creating social change. So even if it's social change for an issue outside of environmental justice, these are three things that we should be thinking about. But how do we change the structures that are there? So that means who's in leadership, who has power, who gets the money, what does our governance say? What are the rules that we have in place? How do we start to shake things up? So starting with the structures, and then starting with the hearts and minds. So whether that's the people that you work with directly, or that's the people who are in power. And then behavior. When I think about behavior, I think a lot about culture. So our values, beliefs, and the behaviors that we have. So a lot of this work does take culture change and culture shifting. But I just love this photo, because I think it's really sound and really hits on the fact that we have to change all three of these things to really get an outcome. We can go to the next slide. I'm not sure if it worked on your screen.
Yeah, I can see it. Do you see it?
Oh, okay. Nope, it's I have my other I guess it's stuck on social change, but if everybody can see the implicit bias one, I can talk about that. It just hasn't changed yet. But so implicit bias, this is something that's really important to be aware of, because if you want to make culture change happen, you have to be really aware of the biases that you might have or other people might have. One thing I want to point out is that everybody has implicit bias. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that we use. It's human nature to make decisions. What's really important, though, is to be aware of the implicit biases that you have and how they could cause harm. So if I were to say to you, close your eyes and think of what a scientist might look like. You might have a certain image in your mind, but we know that scientists can look and can come from all types of backgrounds, right? So that's us using implicit bias to make decisions. But implicit bias is based on our attitudes, our stereotypes, and our beliefs, and it can really affect how we treat others. So again, it's not something that is necessarily intentional. It's what we use, and it's human nature, but it's definitely something that can and has caused harm within this work for a really long time. So just another great term to be aware of. And go to the next slide.
Yeah. Are you seeing it? Because I know people were not seeing it. I don't understand. I'm going to go back and see if I will advance it another way.
Well, no, just go forward one.
Yeah,
Just
that's the next slide.
There you go. Good.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody was seeing the right slide. Okay, great. Go ahead, Mariah. We're on the
Great.
Jimez Principles.
Great. And, if we're able to, I'd love to send these out, or y'all can Google these. Please write down the Jimez Principles if you've never heard of these before. But this was developed by some environmental justice leaders, but I think it's a really great way and a really great foundation for doing authentic community engagement work. And the Jimez Principles, if you Google them, they'll go into greater detail on how to do this. And I'll get into some of those best practices as well from my experience. But number one being to be inclusive. Number two being emphasis on bottom-up organizing. So that means actually working and collaborating with people and not necessarily just going in and parachuting into communities and telling them what they need to do. Number three, letting people speak for themselves. Number four, working together in solidarity and mutuality. Number five, building just relationships among ourselves. So we talked about what justice is and what equity looks like. So building those types of relationships. And then number six is commitment to self-transformation. But this is just something I wanted to share. It's not necessarily principles that everybody has heard about, but if you're interested in doing a lot more engagement type of work, these are just really great principles to live by and to learn about. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So this is the last part of my presentation. I just wanted to talk with y'all about, my personal and professional, experiences and best practices when it comes to authentic community engagement. I think these are things that can be applied to any type of community that you're working with, but I've seen really great success with using these tactics. And if I were to rank these from, starting from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, I think the first one would be to take a step back, to listen and find common ground with whoever it is that you're trying to engage. I think that's a really important first step, and I'll go into detail about that on the next slide. Building trust and establishing some mutual benefits is really important. Creating buy-in is important as well, and then establishing shared goals and expectations. So on the next slide, we'll get into listening and learning. So it's important anytime you're talking to somebody new, especially, and trying to really develop a relationship with them, but it's important to have both informal and formal conversations with people. So getting personal with people, making those personal connections. What is it that y'all have in common? Why would we be having this conversation? But make it authentic, make it personal. It's okay to get down to business, but it's also okay to actually get to know the people that you're talking to. Take time to learn what others know. Don't talk at people. Don't be rude. Use your manners. But oftentimes we can have our big goals that we're trying to achieve, and we can get really busy and just go up to somebody and talk at them and say, I need this, I need that. But a lot of times your issue might not be their number one priority. There's a really great example. I can't remember the organization, but they were an environmental organization and wanted to work with a church. They were engaging with them, and they were talking with them about updating, some of their landscaping to do stormwater project, put some trees in, and the church was like, yeah, all that's great, but our roof is leaking and we really need a new roof. That's an environmental problem, right? And so, that organization really had to take time to take a step back away from what it is that they were trying to do in that moment to really address the needs of the church. But I think that happens a lot in our environmental work, that we can get really caught up in our goals and what we're trying to do. And we really need to take a step back to build trust with people and really understand what's important in the moment, and really meeting people where they are. And then the last one is just learning what strategies have been attempted to address similar issues, what has worked well and what hasn't, whether that's talking directly with the community that you're trying to engage to ask them those, direct questions and feedback, or it's, talking to an organization that's attempted to reach out to that community before. But just really taking some time to reflect on and say what's worked well and what hasn't worked well and how can we continue to improve. Go to the next slide. So building trust. It's important to anytime that you're engaging with a new community, but just to try and leverage any type of existing relationships that might already be there. So maybe that's somebody that you know, or somebody that can make a connection. Usually that's a way to kind of get a shoe in and build trust automatically. That's one tactic, but if you're new as well and you're trying to reach this community or a new audience, it's also important to try and identify who those community pillars are. So that could be the maintenance guy that's worked there for 50 years and he knows the ins and outs and he's got the keys to the building. He's somebody you probably want to know. Or if it's a volunteer that's worked there for 10 years and they know everything about the organization, but somebody who has some influence, somebody who's been there for a long time, and somebody who is a trusted person. So identifying those community pillars is really important. Taking time to actually visit the communities that you want to reach is also really important. Being able to go there and see where it is that they work and what they do is important. Establishing those mutual beneficial relationships. So it shouldn't just be one-sided, but they should be receiving some type of benefit as well. And then working to empower community members who are not already leaders. Maybe it's people who really want to get involved and want to learn more, but there's always opportunity and ways to really bring people in and get them involved. And then involving the community that you're trying to reach at every level. So from the decision to the planning to celebrating your goals is all really important. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So creating buy-in, it's important, when establishing mutual benefits, it's important that the other party can see, why is this important? Why should I get involved? But one of the steps that I think is really important to do is to seek insight and to talk to as many people as possible regarding the issue. You want to make sure everybody's on your side and that you can get everybody on your side. And then you want to also foster collaborative change and partnership. So again, back to mutual benefits, but coming up with strategies that are really going to work for both of you so that you can achieve your goals. And then the next slide is establishing shared goals. And this is a step I think oftentimes people miss, but really working with people and getting insight with them to see, what are the right goals? Are we perceiving things the same? Should we be taking the right steps? Are we on the same page? That's really going to work in your favor to foster collaborative change and partnership. But then also giving clear guidelines is really important. So knowing your roles, who's doing what, who's responsible for what, is all very, very important in goal setting as well. And next slide. Okay. And anticipating barriers. This is also just a tip that I think is important that we often miss, but what could be the perceived barriers that we might be thinking about or we might miss when it comes to engaging a partner. I'm sure there's been times where y'all have tried to engage with people and you just haven't gotten anywhere. And it could be for a number of issues. It could be lack of trust. It could be because of time, money constraints, their accessibility, whether it's getting to a meeting at a particular time or, being there at a certain time, or it's, culturally, you might not be, speaking the same language. You might not be perceived in the same way. your expectations could be different. Your goals might not be realistic, and they could lack capacity as well to really get involved. I'm sure there's a whole list of other things to really anticipate, but I think that these are some really great tips and strategies that you all can really work to implement at your organizations. I've seen a lot of really great success with these tactics, and you can go to the last slide, Koila.
Yeah. That is actually the last slide I have. I'm
Oh,
sorry
okay.
to say.
No, it's okay. The last one was just with my contact information and questions, but I was just going to say to wrap up, these are just my recommendations, things that have worked for me. I'm happy to take any questions if we have time, or also just to listen and learn from you all, if there's things that I didn't mention that have really worked successfully for you in doing authentic engagement work.
Great. Thank you so much, Mariah. And please go ahead and put your contact information in the chat, because that way everyone will receive it. And we'll also make sure it's on the webpage that we have this recording on our website. Thank you so much for that excellent litany of resources, which really show us how we can all work together to ensure that our work has inclusion and diversity, justice, and equity at the heart of our creation care work. Our next speaker is one of two congregation green leaders that we're going to highlight, and they are going to share about ways their congregations are expressing commitment to be inclusive and in their work for caring for this beautiful local watershed we live in. It's my pleasure to introduce Maidia Karpa, who is the Green Team leader at People's Community Church in Baltimore. So take it away, Maidia. I have some of the pictures that you sent, so you can tell your story and share what the pictures depict.
Thank you for having me come and share my project with you. My congregation is People's Community Lutheran Church. It is located on Lock Raven Boulevard in Baltimore, Maryland. And our church is part of the Idlewood community. So in 1995, we became part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And we became the first African immigrant congregation in the Delaware, Maryland Synod. We bought our building through a grant from the ELCA Mission Investment Fund. And the property included the church and a parking lot. We began to work with Blue Water Baltimore to look at stormwater practices and see how we could build a coalition with our community to do a restoration of our parking lot. We started that project. We formed a green team in our church, and the green team consisted of 5 lay leaders. And those 5 lay leaders did an action plan. We worked with Blue Water Baltimore to do the first grant, which was a design grant. And then subsequently, we got a grant for the restoration. My pictures here show my rain garden. I'm the chair and the head of the green team. And this shows our rain garden, a picture of our rain garden in our parking lot. And some members of the green team and Blue Water's staff that observed as we went through the construction of this rain garden. Next one. Next one, Paula.
Yeah. Getting it. Come on. Here we go.
So over these months, we've been upgrading the garden. We started off planting. We have, as part of the grant, we were able to work with the community association also that had buy-in. At one point, we had some barriers that Mariah just talked about. We had some barriers, but we were able to work it out. And we were able to come up with a maintenance plan after the rain garden was completed. So we usually have this maintenance plan where our green team meets every Saturday and work on the actual making sure that the weeds are taken out of the garden and that our stormwater practices are adhered to. We also have community meetings and involve the people who live in the community to share our experiences and our stormwater practices. We do cleanup of the herring run, which is part of the project that Chesapeake Bay offered us this grant for. Our congregation is primarily made up of people of African descent. However, we have some people in the community that are Caucasians. And also we try to reach out as a community church to our people who have experienced war. We had our members are primarily from Liberia in West Africa. And we had a 14-year war. And as a result of that, that's how we started the church. And some of us became social activists and decided that we wanted to make sure that our church, that we were good stewards of our environment. And based on that goal, we were able to get the grants from Chesapeake Bay and National Wildlife Foundation. And we were able to complete our rain garden. And last July, we were able to complete our parking lot restoration also. Next.
Wonderful. Those are all the photos that I have for you, my dear. Do you have anything more to add to your story?
Well, it's been a wonderful experience sharing with the community and sharing with people of African descent and collaborating with African nationals, people from West Africa, and telling them about stormwater practices and how they can implement those even in their communities. So it's been an exciting experience just collaborating with people from the community, people from the schools that are nearby near our church, talking to them about recycling and other issues for environmental protection. And it's just been a wonderful and very, very exciting project. We've enjoyed it. And please, if you're around our area, come and see our rain garden because we think that this is one way that congregations can collaborate with where their churches are and also in their local communities of congregants. So our congregation comes into the community. And so we have this collaboration between the community and the Africans and African descendants who are involved with the project of the church. So if you're on Lock Raven Boulevard in Baltimore, feel free to stop by. We're right on the road, so you can always stop by and see our rain garden. And it's our pride and joy. Say thanks to you for having us to share with you what we've been doing.
Well, thank you so much, my dear. Next time I'm in Baltimore, I'm going to have to visit your project. I really appreciate, and I know this will be a great example for other congregations to emulate your work in really engaging the community and supporting the health of your community and the wider watershed. So thank you so much for offering your story. It's now my pleasure to introduce the next Green Team leader from St. Camillus Catholic Church in Silver Spring, Tom Mello. Take it away, Tom. Oops, you're muted. Let's see if I,
Yeah,
There
so
you
my
go.
name's Tom Mello, and I'm with St. Camilla's Church in Silver Spring, the Catholic Church. It's a very culturally diverse congregation. We have a variety of communities, a very large Latino community, a very large French-speaking community, primarily from West Africa and the Caribbean. We have a large Bangladesh community, a Haitian community, a mission that we have to the Langley Park area of Silver Spring and Prince George's County, to the Hispanic community, and lastly, an English community, English-speaking community of very diverse of all races. So one of the questions you asked us to address was what motivates our community to be engaged and why, and how is environmental health relevant, and how does faith inspire us? And I guess the first point is it really is grounded in the fact that we're a Franciscan parish. The Franciscan friars are the ministers to our parish, and they have a tradition that was based on that of St. Francis of Assisi, where all things living or inanimate reflect our Creator's love for us, and in that spirit, that Francis had. He had a wonderful relationship with the world, with animals, the elements, the poor, the sick, princes, prelates, women and men, and it really created a new model, at least for our faith community, in terms of how we would work together and how would we interact with the world. So we have a number of initiatives underway, and I'll speak to them in a moment. But we participate in Earth Day activities. We have a number of ministries. A basic approach is we try to green our campus, reducing energy consumption. We've eliminated practices which are wasteful and destructive. Simple examples: prohibiting bottled water. We recycle, and then in the gardening program that I manage, we use a lot of recycled materials. The picture you see up on the screen now is an Anacostia River cleanup day that a number of our high school students, a very diverse group, participate in. We have four basic groups that in our congregation that work on areas. One is a committee we have called the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Committee, and it's set up with three specific groups. That's headed by one of our clergy, and lay people participate. They meet monthly or bi-monthly. They plan activities. They implement responses to critical justice and peace and integrity and creation issues that impact us locally as nationally and globally. One is we have retreats throughout the year where we talk about where we build community with each other, and we actually set activities that deal with local, regional, and national challenges, which could involve contacting political leaders. It could involve dealing with both on a state and a national, local, and national level. We run a Christmas gift fair. We raised almost $47,000 to provide potable water to indigenous communities in Guatemala. We recently installed solar panels in a village in Puerto Rico that was hard hit by the most recent hurricane they had 2 years ago. And the picture we saw earlier was our work in the river cleanup program. This is our school, one of the areas. We have a large school, St. Francis International School, and kids from, just as one example of creating their awareness, is to, they have a gardening program starting in the 3rd grade where they raise vegetables, which they use in the school lunchroom, and also provide to our large food bank that we run every week. Another program, this is one I've been involved in, is our Garden and Grounds Ministry. And this was, I'm a more hands-on person, and it was to get people involved in taking care the grounds of the parish, predicated on the belief that, you know, we don't have the resources to have full-time people take care of it. And over the summer, well, since COVID, I've been working once a week to work on gardens and cleanup. And I thought, why don't we allow people to sign up and adopt a portion of the church grounds? We have almost 14 acres, 2.5 acres of garden and woodland. And so we have about 50.
Tom, I think you froze.
Purchase plants and redo a forested area on the parish grounds. This was an area where we tried to control erosion behind the school back in 2018. And we had a group of people that helped us plant grass and plants, native plants, and barriers to help control erosion on the hillside. And then we saw earlier about our school. I mean, the school is very active in engaging the students and parents in environmental issues, and as well as the programs around the school. This was a program we did this fall for gentlemen who work with me from the Hispanic community, and we redid all the gardens around the front of the school. Remulching them, we put in plants that we had donated, and this was a bulb planting program we did on the left in that picture with the young lady and one of our volunteers. We planted over 500 bulbs around the campus, and this was one of our members in the garden ministry who restored one of our gardens next to our small chapel on the campus. So how do we get people to participate? Well, we have an annual ministry fair every year. There are over 40 different ministries in the parish, and environmental issues and environmental justice issues are one of those. People get introduced to it and can sign up. We have messages at church services by the clergy in their homilies. We have announcements at services by the different groups. We have a weekly bulletin, but most importantly, and this is how I found we were able to get 50 people signed up for the garden ministry, was based on personal friendships and relationships. If you approach people and I asked them to if they were interested, and it just snowballed into getting the 50 solid volunteers to help us. So anyone has any questions?
Yeah, great. Oh, thank you so much, Tom. This is really inspiring. And, you know, it's so consonant with what we've shared in our Faithful Green Leaders training about relationship building really makes a difference in strengthening your green team actions in the congregational level. So thank you so much.
I was very impressed by Maria's program that she did at her parish, at her church up in Loch Raven.
Yeah.
I should have mentioned, we have a fellow who I've worked with over the last several years who was instrumental in getting several grants, and we did install some rain gardens that we now maintain through our garden ministry. So
great.
The one that you all did up in Baltimore makes me jealous.
Well, thank you so much. We really want to open it up for questions, and if we can go to a gallery view so we can see everybody's squares and take your questions either in the chat or just unmute yourself now.
Yeah, so there was one earlier question that I saw from, I think it was from Fawn for Medea. Is there signage for the rain garden? And I think the next question to that would be, how much did it cost, right? Medea?
She may have had to go to her green team meeting. She's actually was doing a double duty.
Does anybody else know if there's signage on site? Maybe Bonnie?
Yeah, I believe that there are. Most of the grants, when we do a CBT grant, they like to see signs go up. And a really nice sign is really expensive. If you put one in that is going to weather the weather, they can cost upwards of $600, $700. But we have lots of examples of those that we can share with you if you're trying to do a sign at your congregation, because they can be in all different types of materials and things. So there's a lot of creativity. A lot of our congregations also include scripture or inspirational messages on their signs. So they not only educate about what the rain garden is doing or how it's functioning, but also to be inspirational and faithful as well.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Charlie has his hand raised.
Yeah, I got one up. I'll put the other one up too. I just want to compliment you people, the four of you. Plus my IPC family. I'll tell you, the one thing that makes me rejuvenated and happy is hearing the results, that you've made a difference and protecting God. I just had one comment, and I would say, Koya, do you remember the session at in Centerville at St. Paul's? They had IPC was down there, and they did the garden in the church and everything. But I think the thing that impressed me, one of the things that impressed me, was that they had a Native American. And he talked about, he said, you know, we cared for this and that. And of course, he was dancing and sort of wonderful, but that was really wonderful. So if anybody wanted to see that, that was really great. And the other thing that I have, and I'm with Towson Presbyterian Church, and one of our biggest issue, and Bonnie hasn't been real successful in it, I say, but is engaging the community. How do you do that? Is there any magic bullets or magic wands?
Who would like to field that? I know much of it is about what Mariah said earlier. Would you like to share some more about that, Mariah, about community building relationships and really getting to know people and what their context is?
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, are there any like particular challenges that maybe you've had or like had a question about?
Well, we used to have sessions where we involved the community, like we had the master gardeners come in and things like that. But with this coronavirus, we shut all that down. But what we're trying to do, and thanks to Bonnie and IPC and Collian and Jody, is that we've gotten a grant from Chesapeake Bay Trust to install some rain garden stuff to make us more environmentally friendly. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And one of our efforts in that is to involve the community. And the reason is because it's in Towson, and we're trying to encourage the community to put in rain gardens and rain barrels and stuff like that. And so that's what whether I don't know whether we'll have it in person or not, but that's something I just wondered, does anybody who has participated in that? I mean, after you put in a rain garden, do you have a celebration or something to attract the community so that they will say, hey, that looks good, and in some cases it will be a cost share, like when we work with Bonnie in the gunpowder area. Most of the rain barrels and the rain barrels are cost shared, and that's been successful. But we've done that through the Gunpowder Valley Conservancy. What does the church do to to better attract people to it?
Yeah, I think that there's a few things you can do, depending on your grant. I'm not sure if you all had this written into it, but sometimes you can give out honorariums to individuals to attract them to hearing more about what it is that you're doing, if you wanted to host some kind of listening session or something like that. But yeah, I would maybe just try and figure out if there's somebody that that has a connection to the area in which you're working with. So some of the things I kind of talked about just in my presentation is like, who are the community pillars? Like, who are some trusted partners and people who might be in the area? And then even think about some like non-traditional partners that you could work with that might have access to the community. I think there was a project, it was South River Federation, where they call it the Rat Roundup. And this is also a Chesapeake Bay Trust project, but they were trying to reach out to a Latino, like a Hispanic community that lived in that area of the South River, and found that there were a lot of connections through like the public health services and like the health services that were there. So that's like one, strategy that they have used. I don't know much about the area in which that you're trying to reach, but I would try and think about people that who might have connections there, whether it's other churches or other partners that you have, or even anybody from the trust that might be able to connect you.
Right. Very
Yeah,
good.
I'd like to share an example from Christ the Servant Lutheran Church in Montgomery Village, Montgomery County. They had a lovely permeable paver project on their parking lot, and they hosted a workshop, but they made a big splash out of it. They publicized it. They have a farmer's market right there in the parking lot. They distributed flyers to the community about the workshop so that people then could actually see the project and learn why it's there, why it's actually helping the local water be cleaner and safer for everyone. And so it really was, that was their methodology for community engagement, was really reaching out with an event that was already in place. They just walked around and talked to people about what it was and said, y'all come to this workshop. So,
and connecting with environmental groups that might be there, or even the university and their environmental program might be a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Towson University. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Charlie,
Exactly.
we'll have to talk. Well, we can, once the rain gardens are in and when you do your blessing, that's a great reason to send out a media release and invite all the churches and community associations around you to come and see your rain garden. And the other thing is, Towson started last year this is something that other communities could look at doing, but they have a native plant, and am I going to say this right? A native plant garden kind of competition. So it's kind of like a drive around. People can drive around and then vote on which was the prettiest native garden. So I hope once yours is installed, we'll get your church and other churches on that route, and that will bring other people to at least come by and take a look. So there's lots of things that we can do. We just need to brainstorm and work on that together.
Right, and invite public officials and make sure that you're really making a community event out of it. Yeah. Well, I know we're really up against and beyond our time, and I want to make sure that can I take one more question who has from someone who hasn't.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing? Well, I got one thing to say. It'll be less than a minute. Okay, go ahead. You go first.
Anna, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to respond to Pat, but I think she's all set. So with the survey, don't forget to tell us, respond to our survey.
Yes, be sure and make sure you open up that link with the evaluation. And we're going to move toward a closing right now with Ruth Ann Purchase. And
Could
so
I just say one thing?
we're going to.
Yes. Yeah, let Charlie say.
But I just want our people and Nicolia and Bonnie will give you information about the Maryland Environmental Human Rights Amendment. I don't know if people are aware of that, but I know IPC is a member, and that's all I want to mention. That's all. That's 30 seconds.
Everyone will be receiving emails about the legislative briefing, so you can keep your eyeballs out for that in your inbox very soon. All right, so is Ruth Ann still with us? There she is. All right, so I would like to invite you to share a closing for us, and we're going to go forth from here. Those of you who would like to spend some time gathering and sharing your stories or challenges or questions, my colleague Bonnie has graciously agreed to host a post-webinar gathering. So please do hang out and stay on for that.
Thank you all. Wanishi Wemi. I did post Chief White Otter Coker's presentation in Centerville, Maryland. It's in a link. If you don't know how to cut and paste it out of that chat room there, you could just ask Kolia. I'm sure she can pass it on. It was a very animated talk and it was a very beautiful day. And I would like that example to be replicated, because we met some wonderful people there, and we all decided it would be a wonderful thing to travel together and bring such a team effort to other people's rain gardens and other faith-based facilities where there are beautiful demonstrations that need celebrating. So we could kind of be a traveling celebration team with you, and I could bring some children's activities. There were other people there that had interactive displays and projects that drew a lot of interesting responses from the public, who just moseyed through like it was an open house outside. And quite a few college kids came. And I think it was a beautiful outreach. And I like the idea of all of us visiting one another, not just to get dirty on work days, but also to celebrate. So I encourage all of you to build that community. And like Charlie was asking, and everyone here tonight that's shared has mentioned how important it is to build relationships. So from what I'm learning, and both in-person experiences and in the books I'm choosing to read, most indigenous cultures are built around their relationship with the place where they live and the people and plants and animals they live with. So building relationships is quite a challenge during a pandemic. But I believe that being outside during a pandemic is the first great step toward rebuilding relationships. And it gives people courage and sunshine and getting their hands dirty and their feet wet, or their hands wet and their feet dirty, whatever it is. It's a wonderful way to relate to one another and all living things without the electronics in the way, without the television in the way. So I want to honor our relationships, and I'm going to close with a word, one word. This is the Lenape word for all my relations. And if you've listened to any storytellers, or if you've been in the Protecting the Rivers movement with Native Americans, you'll hear them say, all my relations, as though it's one word. So what does that mean in Lenape? I'm going to say it for you, and then I'm going to teach you the shortened, abbreviated version, because Lenape words are big words because they mean great things. So this is the word, Kikeyu Yemenaning Hake. That means all my ancestors, and we point to the stars, they're as many as the stars, all my ancestors and all their relations. And you bring your hands down, and I actually sing a little song to help people remember. And I say, that includes you, and that includes you. So, Kikeyu Yemenaning Hake, Kikeyu, Kikeyu, Kikeyu Yemenaning Hake, Kikeyu, Kikeyu. You are all my relations, as are the trees I need to breathe and the waters I need to live. Wanishi Wemi, thank you very much. Nulam Hitawanuanak, blessings and health.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Ruth Ann, and thank you, everyone. We're going to stop this recording now and make sure that those of you who haven't opened up the survey, please do so and take that evaluation. It really helps us for future webinars. And stick around to join Bonnie for a post-webinar gathering.